Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Tyranny, a weekly show about authoritarianism, government overreach, and global injustice. And I am your host, Conrad Rogas, and today is Friday, January 20th, and this will be episode 7. And you can find this episode along with all others at thefreedomcurrent.com. And I would like to remind you, as I always do, that if tyranny is not at your doorstep, that's because there's someone in the street keeping it at bay. And we got a good show for you today. We'll begin by mentioning today the Davos meetings concluded at Davos, Switzerland, however you pronounce it, where of course the World Economic Forum with your favorite friendly neighborhood tyrant, Klaus Schwab, is meeting with members of government, environmental groups, and so on and so forth, to discuss basically global planning, what they're going to do, the directions in which economic policy, social policy, politics, you've got all members of the system involved in this. And there's a lot of talk about it. I won't be spending too much time on Davos because it's already been talked about. You can go to any other researcher or reporter, alternative media, people are talking about it, and it's good, you know. This is like when Bilderberg meeting, the word got out about that. I remember I was a teenager, just started being a teenager about 12, 13 years ago. That's when the word got out about Bilderberg, and that's how I came into a lot of this knowledge. But now, well, let's go into a different direction, and we'll go back to the Davos meeting. On Wednesday, January 18th, a 26-year-old man named Manuel Teran was killed in a shootout with police after shooting one of the police officers. So a little bit of background about what happened. This happened in Atlanta. And what's going on in Atlanta right now is the Atlanta police is planning to build a 163-acre police training facility on the outskirts of Atlanta. And if you know anything about Atlanta, the outside is basically it's all a forest. So in this forest, they are building to they're planning to clear a part of the forest and build the training facility. And there has been a movement growing to stop this called the Defend the Atlanta Forest. And basically this movement consists of a lot of young people, young anarchists, people who want to defend nature, you know, and are against police. I did a similar video about this. I see a lot of parallels between these people and the anti-fascist growing population that is against police, but they have some leftist leanings, right? So what happened is the police claim that this man Manuel, he was in a tent, and then the police did what is basically a clearing operation, or like a raid. You know, they went into the forest, they shouted some commands at him, and apparently he refused, and then he fired on them unprovoked. Just the benefit of the doubt does not go to the police in this situation, because one of the reasons they're building an academy like this, a training facility, is because police support and police morale is low following the deaths of, George Floyd, and those individuals that were executed by police. And by the way, when George Floyd was killed, all these people were executed, killed in the street. It's always they were armed. They attacked the police first. The police officer was just acting in self-defense. So as far as the benefit of the doubt in that story, it does not go to the police. But he may have, we don't know if he did or did not fire at the police unprovoked. And this really isn't about proving who's at fault here. We're going to talk about the tyranny that is going on here, without a doubt, whether the police officer was right, or if he was wrong at shooting Manuel. But I would also like to mention this, that if the police officer was wounded, it is likely that Manuel fired first, because otherwise I don't believe he would have been able to draw his weapon first. But regardless, not saying he was wrong if he did fire first, because when the police are coming and they're shouting commands at you, you're in a tent, and your intention is you are not going to leave, because you are standing on principle to defend that land from becoming used to basically be a government training facility for a militarized police force. Well, the police are coming at you with under keeping you under duress and with coercion, and you know that they are going to deprive you of your liberty anyway. So at that point, it is what it is. But the Georgia governor, Brian Kemp, tweeted Wednesday that he and his family are praying for this brave trooper and public safety officers across all law enforcement agencies today. And I just have to break down two words in that statement. Number one, he said brave trooper. And I just have to say it up front as it is. There's no such thing as a brave cop. Because here's your definition of bravery. That is a word that means courage. And courage is doing the right thing through an act of free will in difficult circumstances, right? And order followers, people who follow the dictates of government, they are not acting on a free will choice. They're just following orders. So therefore, order followers cannot have bravery. There are some brave cops and brave troopers, and those are the ones who have quit their job and are speaking out about the evils of those institutions. And next, public safety officers. And safety, that word is defined as the state of being safe, freedom from the occurrence or risk of injury, danger, or loss. Now, those are all things that were going to happen to Manuel, whether he got out of that tent or not. Injury, danger, and loss. And ultimately, he lost his life. So this is just Orwellian doublespeak. It's a plays on words. Public safety. This is public safety. Talking to people to expose evils of the world, talking about morality, making sure that we're on the right path in our conduct. That's public safety, Plumbers. These are people who are doing public safety, not armed thugs with guns. And of course, this training facility will be called the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center. And that name is, of course, a joke, because it's going to be training people on to be more proficient in force, in violence, and in these things, and it has nothing to do with public safety. And this proposed, well, it's more than proposed, they're really beginning construction on it. But this training facility, this military base, basically, is 50% bigger than Disneyland, right? So imagine like a half-mile long square this way and this way. That's how big this is. And the opponents, the Atlanta Force Defenders, are calling it Cop City, and that's essentially what it is. It's like there's going to be a mock village, and well, let's talk about what it includes. Of course, you got a shooting range. Of course, there's a horse barn, a pasture, right? This is a whole little neighborhood. And then you go into the more of the planned facilities, and you've got a mock village. So a house, a convenience store, then they're going to have low-rise apartments, high-rise apartments. They're building an entire village so they could simulate combat scenarios. And I say the word combat because that's what it is. These are military bases. You see this with the army, with soldiers. The police does not need to build complicated environments to simulate the conditions of their day-to-day work, because they're getting the training on a daily basis in the hood, in the neighborhood, in the ghetto, in the low-income communities. Like, let's be real. When you talk about what the police do, I mean, they're responding to domestic disturbances, going into somebody's house. They're breaking up, parties, public intoxication. Of course, you'll have the occasional assault and murder, and relatively occasional because this happens every day. But this is not like they're going into a hostile, like another nation where they need to simulate desert storm, and you need to get used to the sand and the dry air. When they're talking about building high-rise apartments and a house to basically train inside it, they're training for you. They're training for me, for a house that looks more like this and maybe less like the environment that they see on a daily basis. They're training for middle class Americans. And this is the point. What else do they have? They're going to have a Class A burn building. And Class A is a type of fire training used for firefighters and other people, where they use real fire, so not just a simulated smoke and they train how to put out the fire. No, they're actually going to burn things. Usually they'll have like shipping container with pallets and stuff like that to really set the fire and create the black smoke and all the difficult conditions that come with operating where there's a fire nearby. So they're simulating a fire scenario, and also other fire safety training facilities like a Class A burn building. I mentioned that. And you're going to have in that included where they train how to with glass breaking, confined space, and rubble pile scenarios. I'm quoting from the plans that I was able to find from the police, from a organization that is charged with basically presenting this plan. So not from the police directly, but glass breaking, confined space, and rubble pile. And this is all, when I'm reading this is leading towards, okay, what are you guys really saying? And then they mention wood cutting as part of the things they're going to train in fire safety. Now, they actually use the words fire rescue, and it all makes sense on paper, but are the police really going to perform these fire rescue operations? No, this is firefighters do this. I've been rescued from a situation where they had to cut the door open and get me out of a car crash. The police doesn't do that. The firefighters do that. So when you talk about training police in that, what they're really talking about is dealing with a barricade situation, right? When when there's a standoff and they're barricading a door, wood cutting will have to do with, well, instead of going through the door where they know there's somebody barricaded, they're going to cut a opening in the wall, making sure they're going to teach them where they're supposed to cut the 2x4s, basically slight demolition, And this is what it is. They're training for urban asymmetrical warfare scenarios. Make no mistake about it. And let's just cut to the chase. They better be training in that, because what's going to happen, let me start it off with this. The police have always been on the wrong side of history. So in the Holocaust, the police the police force was removed, and then there was a more federal militarized police force. And there never is, when government goes tyrannical, the cops never stand up to the government and say, no, we won't do this, we won't follow the orders. They always follow the orders, right? So when they train for these fire scenarios, the reason they're training for it is because this is what's going to happen when the people resist and they don't have weapons, or even if they do, what's going to go down is they're going to have Molotov cocktails thrown at them from windows into the street, in the apartments, and that's why they're training for these fire scenarios, because that's what's going to happen when it really goes down in this country. If that happens, we try to prevent that on this show, right? But that's what's going to happen. So that's why they're training them specifically in these fire scenarios, because people are going to have gasoline bottles and they're going to be throwing at them, just like the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943, because that's what happens when the people have their weapons taken from them and tyranny goes too far. well, the people are going to put a stop to it. And they're training those police officers who aren't going to say no to the orders, right? So for those who are just going to do whatever they're told, they need to have that training with fire safety, because what's going to happen is you're going to have a person like me at the other side of the door, and even if you have a flamethrower, you're going to have a ball of fire running directly at you. So this is no joke. And when you see them building a training facility like this, it sounds militaristic for a reason. It is militaristic. It's militant. It's preparing for combat, right? And they're preparing for, burn buildings, because ultimately that's what's going to happen when it's the last resort. Somebody, either they get the flamethrowers out or we get the Molotov cocktails out, and it is what it is. Very unfortunate, but that is what this world is heading towards. And if we don't come to a knowledge of natural law, of objective morality, that's what's going to occur. You're going to have a huge bloody conflict, which will not be good for anybody involved, right? But of course, knowledge is the way to avoid that, and mutual respect. So with as much as I am against police, there's a common ground that could be found here. We could get out of this peacefully, and that is what we try to do here. But let's shift gears, and I want to talk about the Atlanta Forest Defenders as being used as controlled opposition, which is not to say that they are paid to be controlled opposition. And for those that don't know, controlled opposition is like when a government has a group that looks like they're anti-government, but they're actually controlling them, they're paying them, they're influencing them, so that they are like a release valve. They are letting a little bit of pressure out, but not too much so that it's a threat to the entire structure. So that's what these young anarchists are, right? Like these environmental anarchists, the forest defenders, the anti-fascist groups that are, that are open and carrying. They're making sure that police don't shut down certain things, and these people that have more Marxist leanings, right? And what I mean by that is far left, no private property, very idealistic individuals, but just lacking a knowledge of, well, no, private property is very important to understand, and complete free market is what's going to generate freedom, right? And yes, we need to do away with money, the religion of money, but you can't redistribute the wealth, because that's just going to create a centralized government in the end. So this is classic stuff. But these groups, these young anarchists, they're used as controlled opposition because young anarchists are predictable. I personally don't. I'm very skeptical of the level of knowledge of anybody my age or younger. You know, when you're growing up and you see injustice happening, you're going to just want to fight back against it, but then you get pulled into these movements where you don't really have the principles in order. Your worldview is not developed, and this took me, years to do. I didn't just start doing a show as soon as I found out that Tyranny is going on. It took about 10 years for me to build up my knowledge base to the point where I know that what I'm saying is rock solid, so I can then distribute that to other people, but also develop the courage to do it. And now these young people, they're always going to have courage, but they don't have the knowledge there. So that's the problem with the young anarchists, like this man who was unfortunately shot and killed. I read a little story about him, and he was using the pronoun they. He was saying that he the abolitionist mission does not end until all jails are free of prisoners, until all cops are gone. And he said that hopefully I see that day, but I smoke, so I don't know. Basically, just a bit of a joke that it might be a bit of a pothead's dream to think that there could be a point where we don't have people sitting in cages and we don't have a group of thugs calling themselves police thinking that they have the right and the responsibility to engage in harmful acts on the people. But I don't smoke, and I am that abolitionist. I do agree with that, and that's what I just see. The problem with the anarchists is they will not be taken seriously enough because they're too much like the hippies. And you see these people that are camping out in the forest, and it's great that they are, because nature does not belong to the government. I know that on the plot of land, it says that that area of land was sold to the city of Atlanta, and in court that holds up as them having the rightful ability to do whatever they want with that land since they allegedly own it. But they do not own it. The governments don't have this automatic jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is a fantasy concept. And I will do a presentation about this, about what ownership is, because ownership is determined by presence. One, are you there? And maintenance. Are you taking care of it? So this microphone, I'm using it, right? So I'm present. I can make the claim of ownership, and it's not sitting on the side of the road somewhere. It's right here. You could tell it's maintained. You could tell that somebody is using it. So therefore, I am the owner of this, and the government of Atlanta, of Georgia, and so forth, the federal government, does not own all this land that it claims to own. Okay, so this is another thing that we just buy, and we just don't bother addressing that claim because we don't have enough knowledge, and we don't have the will to address those claims and say that they're wrong, like the claims that there's no such thing, the claims that there is such a thing as authority, which is false. Human authority does not exist, right? So politics is a fantasy. So you're talking about voting for this, voting for that. These governors, well, they don't actually have the right to claim that they own all this land unless they were actually there building a house, put their name on it, and so forth, like we have to do. Okay? So very unfortunate that these young anarchists are predictable, because this paints being anti-police as being far left. So then when I tell people that I'm against all police, they think I'm just like this person that doesn't really understand the world, who just wants to do away with. They think I'm a leftist and a Marxist and a communist, and it has nothing to do with that, really, right? We just share that in common with those people who have fallen into those Marxist ideologies. Well, they still have that compassion inside them that's telling them, well, this is injustice, that some people are starving and other people are have 20 cars, and they've nothing. There's nothing that they have done to inherently and rightfully deserve being in such a better position than these people. This is injustice. When you're seeing bulldozers and saws cutting down trees, destroying habitats to build a structure that represents slavery, they see the injustice in that, right? So I have a lot of things in common with these anarchists, right? And really, I am a true anarchist, and they are not there yet. Because to be a full anarchist, you really have to understand about the lies of the Marxist ideology, right? The false promises of that. So it is like looking at myself from 10 years back. They're just not there yet. And I believe that the title of anarchist, you need to earn that. That should be worn with pride. And that comes after going through the grueling course of epistemology, of learning about reality, right? But what this is going to do now with these young forest defenders is it's actually going to create support for the police, because it's going to associate them with like this weird hippie movement. They're smoking weed, they're chilling in the forest, these are just kids. So now that people are going to say, well, they're creating chaos, and we want order in the world. So people who do want to be free, but they're more leaning towards the right, they're going to now support police. And there's this really sick, growing support of police and alignment with police as being like pro America, pro freedom. And this is a big problem, because people see the riots after like the George Floyd murder, and they see the immorality on that in that now, because people are throwing bricks at windows, they're stealing. That's of course immoral. Those are the same things that we accuse the police of. So people see that, the more, let's not lie, white, working class, middle class people see that, and they say, well, we don't want that. We don't want to be with these guys. We want order. So the police must be on the right side, because you hear some of them talking about being against globalism. So this is order out of chaos. It's just creating confusion. And another thing that happened recently was that Greta Thunberg was arrested at an environmental protest. So another young person who has some wild ideas, right? Of course, Greta Thunberg has some crazy ideas that if she had her way, we would have tyranny coming from a different direction, but tyranny nonetheless, with all of the things about climate, But ask the question of, why are people driven to act when they see nature being violated? Because this is what's inspiring them. The building of this facility, it's because it's being built in that forest that is inspiring people to take action. So it's something about nature that is waking that defense instinct in these people to defend nature, because nature will the trees won't defend themselves. And the answer to that question, why does that inspire people? It's because we are not programmed to hate nature the way we are programmed to hate ourselves, because we are, and self-hatred prevents self-defense, right? We should be getting upset whenever these facilities are built, not just when they're being built in a forest, not just when a forest has to go down, not only when the earth is being destroyed. There's so much abuse and violence going on in households, just with what it passes as alleged parenting, which is just child abuse. How they treat children in schools, putting them through long hours, more child abuse. There are so many examples that it'll probably take a year to talk about all that. But nature is one thing that awakens that spirit inside of us. So that's a good thing. And through that, through eating healthy and really caring about the animals, caring about the earth, if that's your way to get into true freedom, that's a great thing. But I will make sure to defend people, because we're forgetting about people. It shouldn't take this to drive this desire for change. We should all be in that forest, really, but it's not about the forest, We've got plenty of tyranny right here. Another thing I have to mention, they're building this on the ruins of an old prison farm, the old Atlanta prison farm, which not even 100 years ago you had slave labor. They're working for cheap. They're going to work them long hours. They were. It was still a very racial situation even 100 years ago, where they basically had a chair where the black women inmates, they would whip them, tie them to the chair, and allegedly, that They said they did it sparingly and white women weren't beaten at all. But they admitted it. So this is the person that was in charge of the prison, right? He admitted this. And if that's what he admitted, there was widespread whipping and torture going on. And basically, like a legal plantation, 100 years after slavery was abolished in this nation. And then when there was a little bit of uproar in 1920 about the whippings and that punishment, they changed the law that they were not allowed to whip the prisoners anymore and punish them, that they would go into solitary confinement instead, which solitary confinement is a form of torture under international law. If it's all the criteria of torture, it is much worse than being whipped, or even a lot of, it might be the worst form of torture of all. If you go look into what solitary confinement does, the irreversible damage it does. And I'm not talking about like the way they do in our max security prisons over here. This was called the hole, like in that movie 12 Years a Slave. This was a 4 by 7 foot or 4 by 8 foot room with no bathroom, nothing, just brick, just that's it, treating you like a complete animal. And they did this instead of the whipping. So it just shows you the crimes of the government, the crimes of the state. This was legal and people knew about this. And then when people made noise about it, they changed it to be solitary confinement. And it's just like a sick joke, something that is infinitely worse, and treating people more and more like worse than cattle, complete inhumane treatment. And they're building it on top of the ruins of that, where there are unmarked graves, right, from the atrocities that they did in this prison. So business as usual in this nation, that's tyranny for you. But enough about that. Let's tie it back in with the Davos meeting, because at Davos there are a few governors there. Not all of them. There are 4, I believe, and 2 of them are Brian Kemp of Georgia, right? So I mentioned him earlier, talking about the brave troopers, right? The governor that's in charge of this. And then J.B. Pritzker, the governor from Illinois, my home state, where I am doing this show from right now. And what's interesting about that is that after researching this story, I found out that they are building another training facility like this in Chicago, where I live, about 10 minutes, 15 minutes away from me. And again, I looked at all the plans, see that construction is underway. Very similar situation. They're also going to have a mock village. They're also going to have all this stuff. So it's no coincidence that they're at Davos meeting with Klaus Schwab and these people, the head of the IMF. I mean, you have to have your eyes closed to not see it, unless people aren't bringing the information forward. So that's what I'm just bringing the information forward, so that for anybody who's got half a brain, who's a sane person, can see that this is militarization of police. They're trying to turn it into more of a domestic army, a standing army inside the country. And this is happening right around the same time as they're taking the assault weapons away, right? So I already made a video about them last episode, about how the temperature is going up because of this assault weapons law, which is opening the door to gun confiscation. And now they're going to have a training facility where they're going to train for urban warfare scenarios. If you ask me, it's a little late to start training. The game's about to start. But this just means I will have to do... I'm thinking about doing a full video and investigating more about the police training facility, and talking more about not only the Atlanta situation, but the Chicago situation, how they're attacking the Midwest, and the militarization of the police. The police state is definitely escalating. So I'm thinking about doing that and putting it on this channel and on the Truth and Law website. So this is definitely a developing story. There's definitely a lot going on, but there are a lot of different things you could mention with the tyranny, but the main thing I want to talk about is that I wanted to get across in this episode is that the police have always been on the wrong side of history, right? The government has always been on the wrong side. And 100 years ago, they're throwing black women in like a room that's a brick stone room that's barely big enough to fit them, without a bathroom, right? Keeping them in there for extended periods of time with no food. And are we supposed to think that human beings have changed so much in the last 100 years? Says who? Why do we think this has just gone away? All these evils that were committed in the past. Where's the cognitive dissonance that we think this evil won't be done again? Well, we're not going to be silenced. It doesn't matter how many training facilities you build, you are not ready for what's coming. And I never wanted this show to become a show about rebellion and about chaos and about preparing for a possible combat scenario, because this is about moral education. The reason I'm doing this show is for moral education, just to spread the message to people that when wrongdoings happen in the world, we talk about it. We talk about the things that the news doesn't talk about. But there are gross and severe transgressions being made and encroachments being made on our freedom. And all we can do is speak up. And like they say that Manuel fired at them from that tent, well, we're not firing first, the rest of the nation. We will force you to make the first move. All we are going to speak is the word no. Now, if you choose to violate our space, what's going to happen is going to happen. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back next week with another This Week in Tyranny. Thanks.